Juliet, what's my afternoon looking like? Dr. Pamela Winter had come back from lunch, and by the parking lot, she could tell it was going to be a busy afternoon. Well, Doc, Mr. Guthrie's in room 1, Miss Carroll's in room 2, and your special client is in room 3. Pamela stopped, looking at Juliet with confusion. I thought I only had 4 clients this afternoon. Julia Masters is coming in to forget about something or another, and Robert Townsend was... Yes, ma'am, they're still coming in, but all 3 of these clients just showed up while you were at lunch and said they needed to see you immediately. Mr. Guthrie said it was a blue feeling. Does that make any sense? Dr. Winter felt her nostrils flaring as she headed for room 1. This was becoming a problem that she would have to work out or risk much. When Mrs. Masters arrives, please put her in room 4 and tell her that I'm immensely sorry, and I will half the cost of today's visit. Until I finish with these clients, hold my other clients. Yes, ma'am, said Julia dutifully. Pamela smiled, thanking her receptionist, and heading off to deal with these 3 sudden arrivals. Juliet truly was the perfect woman for the job. Mr. Guthrie was lying on the couch when she arrived, his purple cowboy boots propped up on the arm as a look of immense dread stretched across his face. Dr. Winter went to make some tea as he lay there looking lost, and as it brewed on the hot plate, she sat down and tried to find a smile for him. Mr. Guthrie, to what do I owe the honor of having such a celebrity on my couch? He didn't look like a celebrity today. His normally pristine white hair was wrinkled, and the first 3 buttons were undone and showing a lot of straw-colored chest hair. His jeans had mud on them, like he might have fallen in a puddle, and his cowboy hat was gone. Even his loud purple boots looked muted today, and when he turned to look at her, she heard the voice of an angel calling out for help. Something's wrong, Doc. Something's bad wrong. I don't know what to do. I'm having these thoughts, and they're all bringing me down. Well, let's start with these thoughts. What's got you down, Charlie? Well, I was taking my gal downtown. We just eaten at Chester's. I was just thinking about a song I was going to write for the fall show, and all of a sudden I thought about a place I'd never been before. I was singing on a stage, and people were screaming. The lights were hot, and the music was loud, but it was good. I got done and climbed into a big fancy car, driving in some place I've never heard of. People kept talking to me, calling me something I don't rightly remember. But it wasn't right. I know my name, but they weren't using my name. I got all confused and fell down, and the next thing I know, I was sitting on this couch and waiting for you. Dr. Winter was nodding and pretending to write, but she already knew what would have to happen. He looked startled when she slid the cup of tea into his hand, but he took it and looked into the depths of the murk with his sad, sorrowful eyes. Charlie, you know who you are. You're Charlie Guthrie, the biggest celebrity in Cashmere. You're our songbird, our mountain lark, and we know your fall concert will be just spectacular, she said. And when he looked up at her, she couldn't help but smile. He kept looking into his tea, mesmerized by the dance of light. Are you sure? He whispered, the ripples sliding out as his hand shook a little. I am. Now drink your tea and get back to that song. Miss Maggie and I can't wait to hear it. Charlie Guthrie drained his glass in one long drink, but when he brought it down, he gagged a little as something thick and slimy plopped into the cup. Pamela spirited it away to the cupboard before he could come around, and when he shook his shaggy head and looked around, she was back in place and smiling. He looked as lost as he had the first time when he had stumbled from his home so many years ago. He couldn't have known the forces that looked for him, couldn't have known the people who still looked for him. But Charlie Guthrie, once the sound of a generation, was as much a part of her menagerie as the precious moments figures that Maggie loved to collect so much. Where am I? Doc, am I all right? You're just fine, Winter said. You had a momentary fugue, but you're okay now." He smiled, showing her a mouth of perfect white teeth, before thanking her and telling her to "just bill my insurance. Thank you, honey." He hummed a little as he left the office, something she knew but wouldn't comment on, and she listened to his boots clip-clop down the hall. Then she grabbed her teapot and headed for room 2. Angela Frosky was pacing the room when she came in, looking worse than she had ever seen her. Her hair was ragged from being pulled through her hands that were now clenched by her stomach, as if expecting to find something there. As Dr. Winter came in, the woman lunged at her before Pamela could ready herself for the clenching hands that came up to grab her. "My baby," she said, somewhere between a scream and a whisper. "Angela, your baby is—" But Angela cut her off. My baby, where is my baby? I want my baby, where is my baby?" Pamela Winter set her kettle down, composing herself before she put more than her hands on the fraying woman. It wasn't like this was the first time she had calmed Angela Frosky down before she shook herself to pieces. "Angela, sit with me and have a cup of tea. Your baby's fine. You are fine. And if you'll sit for a moment and calm yourself, you'll see that this is all just nerves." Angela's eyes darted around like a trapped animal, unsure of who to believe, but wanting to believe that what the woman was saying was true. Is it really okay?" she said, letting herself be led over to the couch. Pamela sat across from her, letting her fingers clutch at the side of her pantsuit top. Angela was such a strange thing, but Pamela was fond of her. This was how they had met, actually. Angela wanted to forget the death of her baby, a death that had driven her right over the edge. Her husband had been unable to help her, been unable to do much but tell her to get over it, and she had taken to wandering the streets and looking for her lost lamb. That was when Pamela had found her, shouting and walking, and took her somewhere she could get her some help. Turned out, that place had been Cashmere. "Angela, listen to me," she said, taking her hands as she stopped them from crumpling her top. "Your child is fine. Otto's in school, and Marcus is probably worried sick about you. Did you tell him you were coming here?" Angela's face had gone slack as Dr. Winter spoke to her, her words washing over the poor woman like a warm bath. The mania leaked right out of her, and when Winter offered her tea, she nodded rubberly and told her that would be lovely. Pamela smiled, taking up the cup from the nearby table and pouring it full. "Now, once you finish this, everything will be okay. You'll go back to what you were doing, and you won't give this a second thought." Angela nodded, but as the lump rose in her throat, Dr. Winter saw her gulp it back down and sigh contentedly. Pamela shook her head. Someday, she would either have to bring up her trauma or come to terms with the death of her first son. Someday, but not today. Angela looked at Winter placidly, as if just noticing her. "Oh, hello, Pamela. What are you doing in my living room?" Dr. Winter smiled, understanding that her friend was back to her usual oblivious self. "You're in my office, Angie. You said you weren't feeling well, and you came in for a little rest." "I did?" Angela said, dubiously, looking far away as if trying to piece it all together. Yes, of course I did. It must have been the heat. Thank you for letting me sit for a minute, Pam. Will you and Maggie be joining us for dinner this week? Otto's working on his rocket, and I know he'd love to see his favorite auntie." "Perhaps another time," Dr. Winter said. "But it was nice to see you again, Angela. Stop by any time you feel like you need a little rest." Angela thanked her again, wobbling a little as she rose. Pamela offered her a hand, and the woman talked about her son and her husband and how they were looking forward to the upcoming fall celebration. They say that Charlie Guthrie's working on a new song for the event. I like him. He reminds me of someone my mom used to listen to. What was his name? She said, more to herself than to Dr. Winter. Who can say? Winter said with a smile. Hopefully we can sit together like last year. Till then, Pam, Angela said, waving over her shoulder. She left then, but Winter couldn't help but see her touch her stomach as she rounded the corner. She sighed. A week, a day, 1,000 years, it didn't matter. Angela would be back, and Winter would have to put her back together again. She was heading for room 3 when Juliet let her know that Mrs. Masterson was here and waiting in room 6. That's fine, Juliet. I'm just on my way to see my last emergency. Hopefully, this won't take too long. As she went, she reflected that these emergency cases had been happening a lot lately. Some of them, like Angela Frosky, were like those cars you just knew were going to break down eventually, but you keep fixing them so you can get a few more miles out of them. Others, however, were a little more unforeseen. Many of them were old-timers, people who had been in Cashmere for years, and the work that Pamela Winter had to do on them was something else entirely. Cashmere was a special place, a place for people to escape things that were too much for them, and as a twinge of frost rippled up her arm, she stopped to contemplate who this last emergency might be. The closer she got, though, the less she found that she wanted to find out. She suddenly felt like there was something in there that she didn't want to see, and she started to turn around and go see what vexed Mrs. Masterson. She had taken a few steps away before shaking her head and heading back for exam room 6. She'd get through this. She would see this patient and be on her way. She would finish for the day and go have dinner with her girlfriend. She would go to bed on time. She would wake up, and she would do it all again tomorrow. When she opened the door, however, she felt thick tendrils of dread push through her as she saw the man laying across her couch. He was a simple enough fellow, someone she wouldn't look twice at in a crowd, but looking at him always filled Pamela with a sense of existential dread. It reminded her of a memory she had in her cupboard, a memory of someone as they watched their father die. As they had held his shrunken hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest, they had wondered if they would cease to exist when their father died. Were they real? Were they nothing but a fever dream that this old man was having before the final gasp? Would they cease to exist when he did? Dr. Winter had no father, none that she would speak of, but when she spoke to this man, she felt just that way. She felt as if she might unmake herself by saying the wrong thing. She felt afraid in a way that she had not since time was a squalling infant. I don't know why I'm here, Pamela. You're here for therapy, right? She said, taking a seat before the couch. I mean here. Why am I here in Cashmere? He ran his hand over his luxurious dark hair, staring at the ceiling as he tried to puzzle out something Pamela couldn't understand. I've been here for longer than I should have been, haven't I? Have you? Pamela asked, really not sure at all. How long had he been here? He'd been here before her. He'd been her first patient, in fact, but she did not know how long he had lived in Cashmere. She couldn't even be sure that he did live in Cashmere. She'd never seen his address. She had never seen a check that had been made out from his bank. Winter had never been paid by this man, but she continued to see him regardless. When he came to her office, she had to see him. Those were the rules. He sighed, smiling as he looked at her. Sometimes therapy feels more like talking to myself, but I always enjoy our little conversations, Dr. Winter. I know I should leave. I know things are waiting for me out there. But when I stand at the edge of town and look at what lies beyond, I can't bring myself to go. I wonder sometimes if the town would even go on if I left." Dr. Winter wondered that too. When she thought about it, she felt like doing nothing so much as shaking into pieces. "You're right," he said, getting up and smiling at her. "That's why I come here, after all. Thanks, Doc. You know just what to say. I'll see you at the big fall bash, and tell Charlie not to worry. I'm sure it will be enough to fill even his blue, blue heart with joy." Juliet found her in the room a few minutes later. She said it had been nearly half an hour, and Pamela realized she had patients waiting for her. She couldn't even really remember what she had been doing in here. Was I seeing a patient?" she asked Juliet. "I don't know, Doc. You came in here after you talked with Mrs. Frosky. I don't know. You just had the 2 emergencies. I'm not sure what you were in here doing. Maybe just taking a minute to get your thoughts." Dr. Winter got up and shook off the trepidation that had been building after whatever it was that had just happened. No rest for the wicked, after all. Winter was working late when the phone call came. She was being subpoenaed over that nonsense with the reporter, the one who had been shot on her doorstep last year. She didn't know what they wanted. Winter would be happy to tell them how the man was paranoid and seeing things. His transcripts would prove that, even though Winter didn't believe it. She knew, as well as the man with the black eyes knew, that the reporter had gotten a little too close to something that was bigger than he was, and had paid the price. Winter hated that he'd been bullseyed on her doorstep, but that was the risk of running afoul of shadowy individuals from menacing government agencies. Winter had been preparing to leave, her dinner with Maggie already getting cold, when the phone rang. Normally, she would have let the machine get it, but she felt moved to answer it. She couldn't say why, but Winter rarely argued with such feelings. "This is Dr. Winter's Forgetfulness Clinic. Dr. Winter speaking. How may I help you?" She was aware of a TV in the background, the speaker seeming surprised when she got not a machine, but the doctor herself. "Yes, I need an appointment set up." She sounded young, and Winter wondered if this was going to be another kid like the last one. "Well, if you call back tomorrow, I'm sure Juliet will be happy to." No, please, I need to come in as soon as possible. I need to speak with you urgently." Winter lifted an eyebrow at the phone. "Okay, well," she looked at the calendar on Juliet's desk. "It appears I have an opening tomorrow at 11:30. Will you be paying cash or—" "Yes, ma'am. Cash is fine. I'll be there. Thank you so much." "Wait, I need a name for the appointment." The woman contemplated it for a few seconds before answering Harzo and hanging up. Winter looked at the phone in puzzlement, finally scratching Harzo onto the blotter before hanging it up and heading for the door. She supposed she would see what all of this was about tomorrow. Juliet sounded a little confused when she called Dr. Winter on the office phone. Juliet wasn't someone who often sounded unsure of herself, and it made Winter a little bit easy. "Dr. Winter, your 11:30 is here, but, she isn't alone." Dr. Winter had been showing her patient, a woman in need of forgetting some nasty childhood trauma, out and paused in her farewell. "Did she bring a friend?" Winter asked. "I don't know if I'd call it a friend, but she says she needs to bring it with her for the appointment." Pamela nodded. It wasn't the first time a patient had needed to bring a security blanket with them when they came to an appointment. Therapy was hard sometimes, and it helps to have a comfort object to make it easier. By the sound of Juliet's voice, it might be some sort of reptile, probably a snake. Her 11:30 had sounded like a young woman when Pamela talked to her on the phone, so perhaps it was a snake or a lizard or something. Young people were certainly fond of their strange pets. "That's fine, Juliet. Send them in." A few seconds later, Winter heard the sound of wheels rolling up the hallway. She had a cup of tea steaming on the table for her new patient, but she suddenly wondered what was about to walk through the door. The door opened, and the young woman came in, pushing an AV cart with a TV on it. She looked to be in her early 30s, or maybe late 20s, but she had the strangest expression on her face. Winter wondered if she were on drugs, but greeted her just the same. The woman offered her a limp and sweaty handshake, but said nothing. She pushed a red videotape into the VCR, and then turned to leave as Winter watched her suspiciously. "Excuse me, did you want to stay for the appointment?" The woman turned, her face holding a look of extreme euphoria that you sometimes see in very new addicts. That look, however, seemed to go beyond drug use, and Winter was suddenly a little nervous that something less of this world and more of hers might be trying to attack her. She knew that her father wasn't terribly pleased with his oldest daughter running a halfway house for damaged humans, but she didn't think he would have one of his friends possess someone in order to bring her home. If he had, a young woman with a TV on a cart was an odd choice. "The appointment isn't for me," the woman said in a dreamy voice. "The appointment is for him. He said to tell you to charge me for the whole hour, even though it shouldn't take that long. He'll let me know when you're done." Then she left, and the static on the TV settled into a picture of a Spartan-looking apartment. Winter saw a man of an undeterminable age sitting on the couch and looking at her. The man could have been anywhere from 35 to 55, his salt and pepper hair making it difficult to tell. He wore a vest with a sweater beneath, the slacks crisp and expertly pressed. He had one loafer cocked up on a knee, and he was drinking a cup of what Winter felt for sure was tea. When you were as fond of tea as she was, you learned to tell the tea steam from coffee steam. "Hello, Dr. Pamela Winters. My name is Mr. Harzau. I've heard a lot about you." Winter waited, watching the man on the tape as if daring him to go on. It was a videotape after all, so whatever it was pre-recorded. She didn't like the way the man on the tape was looking at her, his eyes moving like he could see her. His smile didn't seem quite right either. The way it came just short of going into his ears made her very uncomfortable. "I believe it's customary to greet your guests, isn't it, Miss Winters?" "Dr. Winters," she heard herself saying before she could stifle it. She hated being called Miss or Mrs., but it wouldn't do any good to correct the manners of a cassette tape. Whatever he had to say had been recorded a long time ago. She might as well correct "My apologies, Dr. Winters." She jumped a little. It was almost like the tape could understand what she was saying. "Let's get this out of the way right up front. I'm not just a cassette tape. I can converse with you. I can react to your questions, and I can hear your responses. You can talk to me as you would a normal person." "How is that possible?" Dr. Winter asked, her curiosity getting the better of her again. "That would take a long time to explain. Needless to say, I'm something of a therapist myself, but I find that I need your help for a complicated matter." The man glanced left towards the door and then lowered his voice. "I need you to make my friend there forget." Dr. Winters furrowed her brow. "Your friend?" "Yes, the woman I came in with. I need for her to forget about me. For her own good, you understand." Winter met eyes with the man in the TV and found them a little too expressive for her liking. "Why would I want to do that? Surely it's within your power to do so." The man's smile faltered a little, but instead of looking angry, he just looked sad. "I didn't ask for this power. It isn't something I sought out. Whenever someone talks to me, they become dependent on me. It's often to the detriment of their family and themselves, however. The young woman who wheeled me in ruined a relationship with her grandmother. Though that was not entirely her fault either. People talk to me. They covet me. They become afraid of losing me. And it turns into a mania. I don't want that anymore. I never wanted it to start with. I just want to be helpful to people, to make their lives better. But I see now that it isn't meant to be. I'm not meant to help. Whatever made me, created me to cause strife. Winter didn't want to, but she found that she believed this creature's earnestness. What's to stop you from simply enthralling another person once they watch you? He laughed, but it sounded heartbreaking. Not where I'm going, they won't. That's what I want to ask you. As a favor to me, I would ask you to take me to the dump and leave me there. Why me? Winter asked, a little flattered that this thing would entrust its destruction to her. My powers don't work on you. My powers won't work on any of your kind. You're not susceptible to me in the way that most mortals are. I trust you will do the right thing. Winter nodded, telling him to call the girl in. She came eagerly enough, not liking to be away from her VHS god, and when Mr. Harzo told her that she might enjoy some of the tea on the table, she drank the whole cup in one gulp. Winter winced, seeing the redness on her lips where she had spilled. The tea hadn't been scalding, but it had still been pretty hot. She hated to think about what it had done to her throat, but she put it out of her mind as she got to work. She reached in, rifling through her memories as she tried to find the ones connected to Mr. Harzo. The man in the TV looked on with worry, wincing when the girl shuddered under Winter's practiced hand. Winter put her lower lip in her mouth as she tried to untangle the ties that bound Mr. Harzo to the girl. They weren't delicate, not in the least bit, and they hurt her fingers the longer she worked with them. It wasn't like thorns. It was more like fiberglass that worms its way under the skin. "Quite the mess you've made here," she commented. Mr. Harzo shook his head. "I can assure you that wasn't me. Those ties are from her to me, not me to her. I do not seek to enslave people, but they are so enamored by my voice, by my willingness to listen, that they do this to themselves." Winter wasn't sure she believed him, but as the painful knots began to come loose, she drew them out and cast them away. "If you don't want to pay me for a second session, I suggest you hide," she told Mr. Harzo. The man nodded, and to her amusement, he went and hid behind the couch. The young woman shook her head, asking what was going on as she looked around in confusion. The look was similar to someone who walked into a room and forgot what they had came there for. The knowledge of having forgotten, very upsetting in its unknowable nature. "You came in to forget something, and so you did," Winter said matter-of-factly. "I wouldn't give it much thought. It's probably best forgotten." The woman nodded, thanking her and leaving the office with unsure steps. Then Winter looked back at the TV and saw the whatever he was peeking up from behind the couch. "Okay, I've done what you asked," she said, taking a seat as he came up from behind the couch. "Now I have something I want you to answer." Mr. Harzo steepled his fingers and leaned forward, fixing her with his strange blue eyes, waiting for her question. "What are you?" He chuckled softly. "Mr. Harzo, I thought we already had introductions." "No, I mean, what are you? I've dealt with my own siblings, humans who can use magic, elder deities, forest spirits, and creatures of semi-magical or completely magical nature, but I have never dealt with something like you. I want to know what you are, the truth of what you are, if you want any more help from me." Mr. Harzo sighed. "Are you sure? You won't like the answer." Winter glowered at him, saying nothing, and he began. "You and I are similar, though not quite the same. Your father was once like me, a golden being of the sun, but he lost his way and fell with the deceiver. You were born of that fall, and I am born of a similar deception." "So," Winter said, tasting the words and not liking the texture, "you're a demon." "No," Mr. Harzo said. "How familiar are you with the Bible? In the Bible, God uses angels to speak to people because his presence and his voice would destroy them. My Creator was one such angel, sent down to talk to someone God had a message for. That person, unbeknownst to him, managed to capture that meeting between man and divine, and from that recording, I was created. I am angelic in nature, but not an angel." "That still doesn't explain why you enthrall people the way you do." "Well, imagine a being so beautiful, so perfect, that you couldn't help but want to know him. A creature so captivating that it would make you believe in something you didn't before being inundated with that knowledge. That's what happened. I'm formed of the voice of the divine, so my words move them. I do not mean to harm them. Far from it. I want to help them, to ease their pain, like you do. The problem is that they covet me. They want that peace that I bring, and I am imperfect, so I cannot make the peace stay. That's why I sow only chaos, and why I must be destroyed." Winter thought she understood, though her experience with angels was limited. Angels did not usually require a therapist, and Winter had never been troubled by them because of what she was. If Mr. Harzo was correct, then he was the antithesis of what he wanted. He was likely in constant pain, and she could understand wanting that to come to an end. "How would I end you?" "I'm not certain. Whenever I have been damaged in the past, I've always come back together. I do not evolve as the medium does, however, and it appears I'm shackled to this plastic tape." "Why a VHS tape, though?" Winter asked, curious despite herself. "It was what the man had available. When my first owner died in front of his TV, wasting away to nothing as he watched me, I was taken to a thrift store. I've come into many hands since then, and I'm ashamed to say that many of them have belonged to children. The medium seems to appeal to them, and they fall into my trap, whether I want them to or not." Winter thought about that for a moment, finally nodding as she pushed eject on the player. She slid the tape out and looked at it, the lurid red body bearing a piece of tape that proclaimed this to be Mr. Harzo's corner in black Sharpie. It looked normal enough, like any tape that someone might have recorded over, but Winter knew better. "I will fulfill your wishes, Mr. Harzo, if for no better reason than because I can't stand the suffering of children." She gripped the plastic, watching it fissure and snap, but when it broke apart, she kept hold of the pieces. The guts of it fell across the floor, the gauzy ribbons spooling out in opposite directions, and Winter watched for any sign of change. Could it really be this easy? If so, she thought, this one would have been bested long ago. When the spools began to reverse, the plastic coming back together as the thing mended itself, Winter saw what he had been talking about. She looked at it, not trusting it or the dapper Mr. Harzo for a second, before getting back to work. She pushed the TV into the corner, meaning to put it in the storage room at the end of the day. Finally, she slid the tape into her desk, wanting it out of sight. She would experiment with it later, but she doubted that she would have any more luck than anyone else. She would get some help with it. There had to be someone who knew how to destroy things like this and make it stick. For now, she thought, as she checked her watch, she had a 12 o'clock appointment, and she meant to keep it. "I see it every time I close my eyes. I hope you can help me, because otherwise I think I might go insane." Dr. Winters nodded, her back to the man, as she made tea. "Well, that's what we're here for, Mr. Garvey. Would you like some tea? It's a specialty of the clinic. I find it sometimes helps with the forgetting." Garvey chuckled. With all due respect, ma'am, if I could drink these memories away, I would have done it weeks ago. I will take some, though. It smells so unique. He blew on it, making the steam dance, and Pamela smiled as he took a tentative sip. It's ginseng and winter cherry. It's supposed to promote memory recall, so you can get it all out and forget. He had looked unsettled when she had said recall, but he breathed a sigh of relief when she talked about getting it up so that he could forget. Let's start at the beginning, she said, taking her seat and smiling at him. Well, look, before we start, this is one of those things where if I accidentally admit to a crime, it's covered under patient confidentiality, right? Winter laughed. You certainly wouldn't be the first to admit to something unsavory, and yes, my lips are sealed. That wasn't true, and she knew it, but as long as he wasn't about to admit to anything involving children, she wouldn't tattle on him. Humans had been killing each other in new and interesting ways since before this one was born, so why judge them for it now? Okay, well, this happened a couple of months ago, back in January, and it's something I doubt I'll ever forget. I was going through Tennessee, trying to make my delivery before I got snowed in, and that's how I came to be in the Appalachians in the first place. I've been driving big rigs since I was 22. It's the only job I could see myself doing. There's something about being behind the wheel of that monster, knowing it's just you in the open road, that makes me regret that I ever climbed out. I have a house, not a big one, but a house, where I keep my stuff, but that's never been my home. Behind the wheel of my 18-wheeler, catching the scenery pass by, falling asleep in the back, and knowing that I get to do it all again tomorrow has always been the closest thing to home for me. It's probably why I never married. No women, no rugrats, nothing could ever compare to that truck. Anyway, I'm just waxing on. That's not what you want to hear about. I should have known better than to take my truck through that pass, but I was on a deadline and I needed to get there. The road would have saved me 2 hours of highway driving on a good day. As it turned out, it cost me a whole day. I could see the flurries as I drove, and I should have known better, but I just told myself that I knew what I was doing. I took the mountain connector and never looked back. Higher I went, the thicker the snow got. I had good tires, though, and this wasn't my first time trucking in the snow. I did, however, slow down, and that was what I'd hoped to avoid. It was just after lunch when I started up the trail, and as the sun set and I found I still wasn't even halfway through the pass, I started getting nervous. There'd be nowhere to pull over on the pass. It was 2 lanes nearly all the way, and I would have no way to safely sleep up there without possibly getting hit by another vehicle. I decided to push on, but as the blow came past my lights, I started getting worried. The guardrails were covered in snow, and it would be all too easy to go careening off the edge of the pass into the weather. I wished I'd just taken the highway, but it's too late to regret now. There's no way to turn around, no way to reverse back down the mountain. It was succeed or fail, and failure could be catastrophic. As the snow blew, the warm cab hummed amicably. I found it hard to keep my eyes open. I was so warm, and the energy drinks were doing nothing to keep my eyes from snapping shut. My lack of sleep was starting to catch up with me, and when I blinked a little too long, I thought I saw something that couldn't be there. Standing in the road, looking like a deer in the headlights, was a man in flannels. His shirt looked like a stop sign. His eyes were as large as dinner plates, and I knew I would never stop in time. I tried, but not a lot. I knew it would take me over the edge if I started sliding, and as I kept rolling, the man disappeared without a bump or a bang. I shook my head, breathing heavily as I looked fitfully for any sign of the guy. There was nothing, though. No smear behind the truck, no body in the snow, and I shook my head as I came to terms with the error. I'd fallen asleep behind the wheel or seen something that wasn't there. It was easy enough to consider as my adrenaline ran heavy and my mind looked for answers. I'd been driving for 16 straight hours, riding most of the day on energy drinks, and it wasn't unthinkable that I had hallucinated. Could have been nothing. Could have been a deer. It could have been a pothole. As I kept driving, I told myself it was nothing to worry about. I had dozed off for a second and had a bad dream. Thank goodness I had woken up before I drove off the side of the damn mountain. I kept going, kept plugging away, but I think that was when I first noticed the sound. It was loud enough to hear over the rev of the engine, but subtle enough to be all the spookier. I didn't always hear it. Sometimes I would go miles before I heard it, but it sounded like something scratching at the underside of the cab. It wasn't like someone trying to burrow their way in or anything. It was honestly easy to miss if you weren't listening. It was 3 long scrapes, and then it was silence. Sometimes it was every minute. Sometimes it was every few minutes. Sometimes it was once an hour. It persisted all night, but I told myself I had picked up a stick, that was all. I'd run over a limb in the snow and was just dragging it behind me. Snow would clear it up and it would dislodge soon. The longer I drove, the more the wind began to sound a little too human. The wind had buffeted the truck since I had ascended upward, but as I came back down, it began to get a little better. Without the blowing wind to cover the cab in snow and ice, I started hearing something in that wind. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it seemed to creep into the cabin and it sapped all the warmth out of me. "Help!" it wailed, a ghostly nail against my spine. The first time was easily put aside. It's just the wind. It was just my nerves. It was all in my head, and I'd be fine once I got off this mountain. An hour later, as the words became clearer and clearer with each iteration, it became harder and harder to ignore. Paired with the scratching, the blinding snow, the difficulties in keeping my eyes open, it all came to a head as the dark road stretched on and on. Should have been off this mountain by now, but that snowy road just went on and on. Was I still dreaming, I wondered? Had I run off the side of the mountain, and this was purgatory that came afterward? I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, praying that the mountain would end soon, and I'd escape whatever strange world I had found up here. All the while, the nails scratched and the voice wailed. I began to shake the farther I went. I thought about stopping to check, but as the grade became steeper, I wasn't sure I could safely do that. Plus, I was a little scared about climbing out to have a look, afraid it was a trick. I wasn't afraid of getting robbed or nothing, but I'd grown up with stories of haunted Appalachia. In my susceptible state, the idea that I had pissed off some mountain spirit seemed very real, and I plowed along at a suicidal speed, hoping no one had broke down ahead of me. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I finally came off the mountain, and I'd never been gladder to merge with traffic in my life. It felt safe to have other cars around me. Felt like maybe the cries for help and the scratching might go away now that there were people around again. The farther the mountain grew behind me, the more I thought I had escaped whatever spirit I had angered up there. But I was wrong. It waited until my hope was at its highest. Then I heard it again. 3 long scratches, followed by silence. I almost ran into the car in front of me, my brakes barely stopping in time when the tail lights flared to life. It wasn't possible. I was out of the mountains. I turned on the radio, fearing I would hear the voice next, but it was just the scratching after that. I had found a country and western station, but nothing seemed to drown out that scratching. I switched to a rock station, something a little louder, but I could hear that scratching even over the loudest vocals. Nothing I did seemed to help, and I suddenly remembered that I had the headphones I sometimes used for the CB. They'd block out the sound. They'd block out almost anything. As I slipped them on, I was left in a world of muffled silence. Then, as if something were scratching right within the hard plastic, I heard 3 long scratches, followed by silence. The left ear of the headphones broke when I threw them violently off me, and I put on my hazards as I pulled over to see what had gotten stuck under my truck. I knew it had to be something making that noise. My truck had never made a noise like that before, and if I dislodged the branch or the root or whatever, I could show myself that it was something normal and no ghost or goblin after all. I put on my heavy coat and my thick wool hat before I reached for the headlamp and the glove box for good measure. Then I kicked open the door and grabbed the handle beside the cab. Last thing I wanted to do was bust my ass in the snow as I stood beside the road. When I came off the step, I planted my feet on the ground and saw something else that might be useful. The broom was something I used to sweep out the cab sometimes, but I thought it might work to dislodge whatever had become stuck under my truck. I could feel the snow sopping into my jeans as I took a knee, and as the headlamp came on, I looked for the source of the noise. There's no branch or root under there, but when I found the source, I did a little screaming of my own. He'd gotten wedged under there somehow. His arms tangled in the metal handles under the cab. He'd been dragged, that much was clear, 'cause his legs were little more than shattered nubs. He had indeed been wearing red flannel, and it had gotten hung under the cab as well. His eyes stared at me, almost accusingly, and it took several minutes to get a hold of my nerves. What was I going to do? I'd killed somebody. I'd run over him like an animal, and now I'd have to face the consequences. They'd send me to prison if I was lucky. If I wasn't, they'd still send me to prison, but only until it was time to give me the needle. No, I thought I wasn't going to let this stranger ruin my life. I jabbed him with the broom, hoping he would just fall out, but no luck. I poked at him some more, begging him to just fall off, but he was stuck tight. If I could dislodge him, I could just leave him in the snow by the side of the road. They wouldn't find him until the snow started to melt, and by then, all the evidence would be gone. No one could ever link me to this, and I could continue to go about my life as normal. "Get out from under my truck," I growled, jabbing at him with gusto. I didn't think he was going to come out for a moment, but after a particularly vicious bit of jabbing with the broom, his arm detached and he fell wetly to the snow. Didn't take much manipulation after that to get the arms unfolded. And then he was in the snow with his pieces scattered around him. I felt a momentary wash of guilt, but I pushed it away as I climbed back into the cab. Who went hiking up the road in the snow anyway? He'd been a fool who was walking up the snowy road in the middle of the night in a snowstorm. As I pulled away, I breathed a little easier when I saw the snow beginning to cover him. To the average passerby, he would just look like a bag of garbage that someone had tossed out on the side of the road. I drove for another hour, fighting sleep the whole way, till I found a rest stop far enough away from my crime to be safe. I pulled in and secured my cab and prepared to get some shut-eye. I could squeeze a few hours of sleep out and only be a little bit late to drop off my cargo. After all, the snow had slowed me down, right? I had settled in the sleeper cab, already fallen into sleep that would definitely be deep enough for me to ignore my alarm, when I heard something I couldn't ignore. 3 scratches on the underside of the sleeper cab. I sat up, looking around as if someone might be in the cab with me. It wasn't possible. I'd gotten rid of him. There was no way he'd be scratching at the bottom of my cab. It wasn't possible. I was imagining things. I told myself I needed sleep. I needed rest. I just needed some shut-eye. And I would help. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't imagined that. That had sounded like it was in the cab with me. Help. I was shivering, my teeth chattering, and the scratching had started again. I pulled the covers up over my head, trying to block it out, but no matter what I did, the phantom words always found me. I was crying as the scratching increased in frequency, and soon it was a constant scrape, scrape, scrape of nails on the bottom of my truck. I was shaking and crying and trying my best to pull it together as the sound of my ghostly passenger cascaded over me. I closed my eyes, pulling the covers over my head as I tried to block it all out. I was imagining things, I told myself as I sat shuddering beneath my blankets. This was all just a hallucination. I was sleep deprived and caffeine overindulged. I'd eaten a bad gas station hot dog that morning, and this was the result. There was nothing otherworldly at work here. It was all nerves and stimulants. There was more gravy than of grave of this fella. Help. I jumped at the voice as it echoed through my skull, and suddenly I couldn't take it anymore. I was out of the cab and running, looking aside as I ran for the rest stop information center. I pounded on the door until somebody came to answer, and I must have looked frantic because they agreed to let me in to call the police. I sat in the office and sipped at the water he had brought me, shaking like an old man as I awaited my fate. I told the police everything when they arrived, skipping nothing and telling them every incriminating detail. From the start, the police were skeptical of my story. They too thought it unlikely that someone was hiking in the mountains at night, in a snowstorm no less, but said they'd go check out the site of my body disposal. They left an officer with me while they went to investigate my claim, and about an hour later they came back to ask me how long I'd been driving without sleep. I told them it had been nearly 24 hours, I guessed. They said it sounded like I'd been hallucinating. We didn't find anything out there. No body, no arms, no sign that you even pulled over to dislodge something. We checked out your truck too, and there's nothing to suggest that you had a body stuck under there. We advise you to get some sleep, and hopefully you'll feel better. I told them I would, but I ended up driving to a hotel and leaving the truck in the lot. I made the delivery, but whenever I'm in that truck, I hear the sounds of my ghostly sin. 2 weeks ago, I sold the truck and walked away from the business forever. My boss was sorry to lose me, but I can't do it anymore. I'm terrified that I'll get sloppy and kill someone else, and I just can't trust my own senses anymore. The cops can say what they want, but I know what I did, and I know what I saw. Thought it might stop once I sold the truck, but I can still hear him calling for help when I close my eyes. No matter where I sleep, I'm still haunted by that ghostly scratching. As much as I want to, I fear there'll be no rest for me. Mr. Garvey gagged as the memory came up, and Dr. Winter whisked it away before he could come around. He was pleasant enough when he came back to himself, if not a little unsure of what he was doing there. Winter told him he had come in for a session, and it must have worked because, well, he couldn't remember anything. He thanked her for whatever he had needed to forget and told her that He would have to tell his friends what a great job she had done. Winter waved him out, but she knew it wouldn't fix what he was experiencing. She had seen the angry spirit, the one that floated above him like a storm cloud. That one would need more than just forgetting, but maybe Mr. Garvey deserved him. After all, everyone had to deal with the consequences of their sin, didn't they? I just need to forget it. Then everyone will be safe. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow at the kid who'd come tearing in here like the world was on fire. She didn't get kids very often. It was usually just adults that wanted her help. She had certainly never gotten an unaccompanied child in here in the whole time she'd been open, and Juliet looked fairly frazzled when she had called Pamela out to help her with the babbling middle schooler. Dr. Winter had been prepared to send the kid on his way, maybe even call his parents if he was someone she knew from town. But one look at the kid had shown her that he needed a little bit more than directions. "What is it you think is after you, Mr. Sid?" the kid said. It's hard to explain. My friend Ralphie and I never meant to hurt anybody. We were tired of Danny always having the good stories. We wanted some stories that would make people scared, but we took it a little too far." The cup in his hand shook fitfully, and Pamela was a little afraid he was going to spill tea on the carpet. As he took a sip, she was glad to see that some of the shakes erased in his hands. "Why don't you start from the beginning? I find it always helps to start from the beginning." Sid nodded. I guess it all started in the gym equipment room. It all started with Danny and his scary stories. Marky banged on the door, his eyes beginning to tear up as he called for help. He'd gone into the equipment shed looking for answers, and what he found scared him nearly to death. As he banged on the door, he could hear the creature pulling itself free of the wall behind him. The massive paws came to rest on the ground, the claws clittering on the pavement, and he could almost feel the rumbles as the beast came for him. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp, but Terrence didn't seem to have any such hesitation. He moaned like a trained mourner in a soap opera, and Ralphie slapped a hand over his gaping mouth as he leaned forward in expectation. Danny had us all in the grip of his story, and he knew it. He continued to weave his tale as I tempered my excitement with the reminder to listen for the approach of Coach Tyson. The handle, which had been unlocked when Marky came in, was as unyielding as the walls around him, and as the beast came closer and closer, Marky felt terror growing inside him, threatening to overtake him. I perked up my ears, having heard a noise from this side of the veil. Was it Coach Tyson looking for 4 missing students? Was it Coach Leanna coming to get something from the equipment shed? Was it a monster like the one in Danny's story that was stalking us from amidst the dusty football pads? Who could say? The monster leaned down over him, its breath hot against his ear as it spoke. "I told you what would happen if I caught you in my lair again. Now I'm prepared to make good on that promise." Something wet fell onto Marky's shoulder, the spittle dribbling down as it prepared to rip his head off. We were all leaning in, our heads close enough to be clonked together like the Three Stooges, just waiting for the thrust. When the door opened suddenly, Marky fell into the hallway. Coach Blashkowitz looked shocked, and Marky crawled behind his legs as he looked into the equipment room, the creature nowhere to be seen. As if on cue, the door came open, and Coach Tyson poked his head in with a dramatic, "Aha!" He acted like he had caught 4 weasels in his hen house, but he couldn't have been that surprised to find us there. We met here in the equipment shed every chance we got, and We were constantly ditching gym class to tell spooky stories. "I thought I'd find you four in here. If you intend to finish your mile in the allotted time, you better hurry. There's 20 minutes left in class, and I think it's going to take every bit for you guys to get to the finish line on time." I squinted owlishly as I came out, the sun very bright after being in the depths of the equipment shed. I rolled my eyes as I saw Justin and his friends, Ryan and Frank, sitting on the grass by the finish line. Coach Tyson probably hadn't even noticed we were missing until those three had finished their laps, and now we had less than 20 minutes to run a mile. Coach shouted for us to get a move on, so we got a move on and started beating feet. As we ran, I asked Danny if he had meant for the coach to burst in his story too. "Absolutely. You didn't really think I was going to let the monster get Marky, did you?" I had, but I didn't say as much. Sucks he found us. I had a great story planned for today, too. Danny laughed and made me feel a little angry. "What's so funny?" "Nothing personal, but your stories kind of blow." I slowed a little, not quite wanting to understand him, before speeding up to catch up with the group. "What do you mean? My stories are as good as yours." They weren't, and I knew they weren't, but my pride was hurt, and I wanted to vent. Danny looked like he was going to answer, but Terrence beat him to it. "No way, dude. Danny's stories are the best. Your stories sound like something that wouldn't make it on a creepypasta website." It wasn't what Terrence said that got me. He was too stupid to chew gum and walk, but it was the little nod that Danny gave in return that really rankled me. I was still thinking about it as Ralphie and I rode the bus on the way home, Ralphie trying to cheer me up. "Come on, buck up. Danny isn't such hot crap." "Stupid Danny," I groused, doodling on my pad as I sulked. "Thinks he's such hot crap just because he's in Mrs. Herkimer's creative writing class, just because Mrs. Herkimer invited him to the 8th grade writing club after school. I can write just as good as he can." Ralphie was watching me doodle over my shoulder, and he raised an eyebrow as the picture took shape. Who's this fella you're drawing here?" I looked down, not paying attention to what I was doodling, and I almost started. I'd drawn a large, muscled man, his face bulbous and ugly. One eye bulged from his skull, while the other seemed too deep in the socket. His cheeks were puffed out like a chipmunk, holding nuts for the winter. He had a hump, one shoulder higher than the other, and his arms ended not in hands, but in rounded tumors that had scabrous bulges on them and looked to be trickling pus or something. He had no fingers, no knuckles, but those big, round bulges at the end of his arms. "Billy," I said, absent-minded again, though it was from the shock of this creature. "Billy?" Ralphie asked, the bus jouncing him as it took off. "Billy Gumballs," I said, drawing a pair of overalls onto him. I added large gum rubber boots without socks and a few more veins on his rounded knot hands. I drew an undershirt, but erased it. It didn't seem right, and it looked better without it. He was bullied in high school for being different, and they called him Billy Gumballs because his cheeks bulged like he was chewing too much gum. When he was snubbed by his crush for the school dance, he murdered the kids at the dance and disappeared before the police arrived. The school was abandoned after that, and now the local kids think the place is haunted. They're right, because Billy still lives there, and he kills anyone who comes into his school. Ralphie listened, nodding along as the story came together. The bus rumbled away from the school and towards our street. I told him how 4 middle school kids had gone into the old school on a dare, and how each of them had run afoul of Billy Gumballs. Only the last kid had survived, and Billy had let him go so he could tell his story, and people would be afraid of him. The kids died in the usual horror movie ways, but mostly they were crushed by the heavy tumor hands of Billy Gumballs. I illustrated some as I talked, and as the bus stopped at Ralphie's house, he smacked my arm and told me I'd written a real great story there. "What story?" I asked. All I'd been doing was doodling and talking. "Your Billy Gumballs story, of course. "You should tell it tomorrow. I bet Danny wouldn't say it blowed." I realized he was right, and what's more, I realized I could do one thing better than just tell it. As I got home, I lay on the couch and started drawing it out. I could make a horror comic out of it, something even Danny couldn't do, and then I could impress him. That'd show Danny whose stories blow. I drew the last couple of panels as I lay in bed that night, and when I tucked it into my backpack, I couldn't wait for school the next day. I worked on the cover as I rode the bus that morning, and when I stepped off, I was excited to show it to Danny. I was so excited, I ran right into Ryan and Justin and Frank. "What you got there, nerd?" Justin said, seeing the hand-drawn comic under my arm. "Nothing," I said hastily, trying to get past the trio. Justin and his friends, aside from being good at gym, were pretty big bullies in my grade, and when Ryan deftly took the comic from under my arm, I cawed and told him to give it back. "Billy Gumballs," he said, tossing it to Justin as they played keep-away with it. "What the hell is this?" "It's a school project," I lied, trying to get it back from him. "Come on, give it back before you wreck it." Justin opened it, thumbing through the pages as he deftly avoided me. "Huh, not too bad for a baby," he said, tearing one of the pages in half and letting it fall to the ground. You can probably guess what happened after that. By the time the bell rang, I was left on my knees in the hallway, trying not to cry as I salvaged the pages of the comic. It was ruined, wrecked beyond repair, and as I sat in homeroom and seethed, I knew just what I would do. I'd make another one, but instead of 4 friends going to find Billy, it'd be 4 bullies. I'm not sure why. There was no reason to do it, but as I remade the comic, Danny became the leader of the bullies. He hadn't done anything worse than offering honest criticism, but I couldn't help but think of him as responsible for this too. Without Danny, I would have never drawn the comic. Without Danny, it would never have existed to be destroyed in the first place. No one survived this time. They were all killed by Billy Gumballs, and as I finished the last page, I felt a weird surge course through the hairs on my arm. It reminded me of something my grandma had said. It reminded me of having a goose walk over my grave. When the bell rang, I found my friends by the stairwell, waiting for me before we went into English. Ralphie nudged Danny, who was standing off and looking guilty, and when he walked up, he rubbed the back of his neck as he apologized. I was sure that Ralphie had put him up to it, but the longer it went on, the more genuine it seemed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what I said affected you like that. I really didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Ralphie said you've been working on something cool. I'd love to see it, if you want me to." I wanted to say something, but I was dumbstruck. Suddenly, the comic in my hand felt like an accusation, and the last thing I wanted to do was hand it to Danny. It's not quite done yet," I said, pushing it behind my back. "I don't want to show it to you until it's perfect." Danny nodded, clearly wanting to see, but still feeling guilty about what he had said the day before. "That's cool. I'd still be glad to look at it when it's done. Ralphie's been talking about this Billy Gumballs all through homeroom. He sounds pretty cool." I filled Danny in on some of the details, slipping the comic into my bag as we walked to class. I would redraw it later, I decided. I was a so-so storyteller, but I was good at drawing, and I knew I could make another one before the end of the day. I'd just draw Justin and his friends getting smashed up by Billy. That would be fine. Danny had apologized, but I was still mad at those bullies that had wrecked up my original comic. I doodled in English, and then did some more in math class. By social studies, I was getting close to completing it, and as the lunch bell rang, I put the finishing touches on it yet again. It was weird, though. When I got done, I didn't get that same feeling I'd gotten on the one I'd made earlier. This time it just felt normal, like it always did when I completed a drawing. I shook it off, figuring it was just nerves, and took it to the cafeteria to show my friends. We spent the lunch period marveling at the intricate ways that Billy Gumballs smashed and bashed the 3 boys who had made our lives a living hell since kindergarten. Danny laughed more than he looked afraid, but when he tapped the comic with the back of his hand and declared it to be the best story I'd ever written, I felt proud of myself. The guilt I had for the one that I had hidden in my backpack was gone, and I felt like maybe we could begin to get past it. When a scream erupted from the hallway outside the cafeteria, we all ran to see what had happened. It was Vanessa Franks, and she was pointing to the crumpled form of Justin's friend, Fred. He was leaning against one of the lockers, his head a little more than a pulpy melon. We would learn later that his skull had been caved in, the bones shattered like an egg. Vanessa had been on her phone, not really paying attention to where she was going, and slipped in the pool of blood that had formed just beneath him. That was why she had been screaming. She had slipped and looked up into the ruined face of her classmate and nearly lost her mind. They came and took the body away, but all of us were in the gymnasium by that point. They had moved all the students there and locked the school down while they searched for the killer. They felt pretty confident that whoever had done it, they had to be in the building, and they would have enough blood on them that they would know what they had done. Beating Fred to death would have left quite a lot of damage to them as well, and the teachers and the police had interviewed most of the students to see if they could narrow down the suspects. My friends and I were chattering about the murder, but I was on pins and needles. They had forgotten about my comic, and thank God for that. The one they had seen, however, wasn't the one I was worried about. It was the comic in my bag that made me afraid. If the cops found that comic, I'd have a lot of questions to answer, and they would probably be answered in a little room at the police station. There was a picture in that comic of Fred with his head smashed against a locker, and it looked very similar to the scene upstairs. Fred had been the first victim, and when Justin turned to Danny to ask what they were going to do now, Danny had told them that they would find who had done this and put him down like a dog. "It's weird, isn't it?" Ralphie said, bringing me out of my contemplation. "What's weird?" "You drew a comic about those bullies getting killed, and then one of them got his head caved in." I agreed it was pretty weird, reflecting that I was glad the one I had shown them had featured Fred getting thrown down the stairs. "You..." Ralphie started, wetting his lips as if not sure how to begin. "You didn't have anything to do with that, did you?" I wanted to deny it right away, but I was having trouble forming a good argument. Of course I didn't have anything to do with it. How could he even think such a thing? Just because I'd drawn something similar didn't mean I had anything to do with this. "How could I, Ralphie? I was in the cafeteria with you guys when it happened. Remember?" Ralphie nodded, but the look he gave me was still pretty hard. They put us all on buses and sent us home not long after that. We were assured that school would be back in session tomorrow, but we weren't so sure. They still hadn't found the killer, not a trace of him, and Fred's parents were distraught. The bus Ralphie and I had been on had driven past his mother as we pulled off, and she was shaking in tears as she sat on a bench outside the office. Seeing that made me feel guilty all over again, but I wasn't sure why. Ralphie didn't talk much on the ride home, and the goodbye he gave me as he climbed off was decidedly muted. I wonder if he really thought I had done this, and as my stop came up, I decided I wanted a nap instead of TV this afternoon. I tossed my backpack down when I got home and went to lie on the couch, but my nap just wouldn't come. When the phone rang a little while later, I got up and answered it groggily. It was Thursday, so Mom wouldn't get off till 5, and Dad wouldn't be in till after bedtime. I had the house to myself until about 5:30, but I wished that they had been here. I needed to talk to somebody about this, about the guilt I was feeling for some reason, and I just knew that my parents would help me out. I found Terrence on the other end of the phone, and he sounded hysterical. "They found Ryan's body this afternoon at the school." I sat up straighter, not sure if I was awake or still dreaming. "What do you mean?" I asked. He was on the bus home, same as the rest of us." "I know, but my dad called me about 10 minutes ago all spazzy. He said that one of the officers had been searching for the guy under the bleachers in the gym when he found Ryan all crumpled up under there. He was beaten to a pulp, and he wanted to know if I'd locked the door and was being safe. I told him I was, and he told me to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. until my mom got home. I'm scared. I don't know what's going on, but it sounds like kids at our school are getting killed." "No," I thought as the phone slipped out of my hand. "Not just any kids at our school. Kids that I had drawn in a comic, dying in the ways that they had been found dead. In the comic, the one I had hidden from my friends, Ryan had been dragged under the bleachers and the group had found him later beaten to a pulp. A literal pulp. In the comic, they only knew it was him because of his sneakers, since the rest of his body was a pile of bloody meat. Terrence, does your dad have any idea who's doing this?" I hedged, trying to find out if I was a suspect for some reason. "Not a clue, but the police are really scratching their heads." I hung up on Terrence and hovered over the number for Danny's house. I was hesitant to call him, wanting to worry him even less than I wanted to admit to having written this suddenly relevant comic. I dithered for a few before thumbing his number, listening to it ring before his mother grabbed it on the fourth one. She told me that Danny was at the pizzeria on Sherman, and she supposed he had forgotten his phone. She asked if I wanted to leave a message, but I told her that was fine. I was going to meet him at the pizzeria anyway. We hung up, and I grabbed my backpack as I headed out. My timing must have been impeccable, because I caught him just as his pie arrived at the table. "Hey, you feel like a slice too?" he asked, inviting me to sit. "Nah," I said, taking the comic out of my bag. "I need to come clean with you. I could overlook the first one as an accident, but after they found Ryan dead too, I don't think I can overlook it. This was the comic I did earlier today. Something I wrote while I was mad at Justin and his friends." Danny looked at the cover, opening up and leafing through it. He raised an eyebrow when he saw himself leading the bullies. As he read, though, something strange happened. Far from being horrified, he began to laugh. When he came to Justin's death, the bully decapitated with a single punch, his head falling down the stairs and into the boiler room, Danny wiped an eye and looked at me in disbelief. He seemed confused that I wasn't laughing. "Oh, come on. Sure, it's scary, but it's also a bit over the top. It's almost cartoonish. 2 people have died in exactly the way I drew it. I'm the only one besides you who knows it exists, and I can't help but think it's a little bit serious. They'll put me in jail for this. They'll use this to put me in the electric chair down at Stragview. They'll think I murdered those kids." Danny shook his head. "There's no way you killed Fred. Ralphie and Terrence and I will attest to that. You were with us all through lunch, and I can't imagine that anyone would believe that a shrimp like you did that to Fred or Ryan," he said, holding open the book to the page in question. I was stunned, unsure what to do, and when he laughed again, I found myself laughing right along with him. How had I not seen this? They could testify that I hadn't been anywhere near either of those boys. The GPS on my phone could tell the police that I'd been at home all afternoon. There was no way to link me to any of this. I was safe. "Come on," Danny said. "Come hang out at my house till your mom gets home. Then I'll walk you home just to make sure that old Billy Gumballs doesn't get you." We laughed about it all the way back to his house, cracking jokes as we talked about the character. Danny said he had some ideas for what Billy could do next, though we'd have to keep real people out of the story this time. We couldn't have the police trying to claim that we were killing people through fiction, he said, and then we both were laughing all over again. As we came up the stairs to his room, I told him I was going to use the bathroom, and I'd catch him up. "Well, don't take too long. I'm going to get some Dead by Daylight going so we can play co-op." I said that sounded great, and we parted ways. I was standing at the toilet when I suddenly remembered something. In the comic, Danny had gotten away in the end, but Billy had been waiting for him when he came home. He'd come out of his closet, I reflected, and smashed his head after sneaking up on him from behind. I started to run to him, but I stopped as I zipped up my pants, remembering what Danny had said. It was just a coincidence. Nothing like that happened in real life. Heck, I thought as I flushed, I bet Justin was safe and sound at his house as I was thinking about this. I shook my head as I let the water flow over my hands. Such an idiot. I'd gotten myself all worked up over nothing. When I heard him scream from the next room, I came tearing out of the bathroom as my flimsy hope fell apart. I came running into the room, my hands still dripping wet, and that's when I saw him. Danny was sitting in his desk, the controller in his hand, with his head collapsed into his chest. Someone had driven his head in like a nail, and the perpetrator was still standing behind him, looking at me guiltily as he turned towards the door. I thought I was dreaming, that I was hallucinating, but as we stood looking at each other, I had to come to terms with the realness. His head was bald, his skin was pale, his cheeks looked like a squirrel preparing for winter. He wore overalls without a shirt under them, and gum rubber boots that were black as pitch. His hands were bloody, covered in old and new blood, but even so, no one would mistake them for real hands. They were rounded, a pair of bulbous tumors that sat at the end of each wrist, and when he turned to run, I yelled for him to wait. Instead, he jumped out the window and was gone. Winter sipped her tea and watched the boy as he struggled with the memory. He had brought up more than one. The memory's too big for a single pull, but she thought this might be the last one. His cup looked like it had buoys floating in it, and she doubted there would be room for another. Pamela reached over and took the cup, replacing it with a fresh one before he could make a mess. "What happened after that?" she asked, leading him. "I thought it was over, but then people started going missing. Hikers mostly, vagrants, people with car trouble, people I could have overlooked. It's just bad luck, bad weather, or human nature. Then it started killing kids. It came out of the woods and started lurking in town. The murders were the same. People beaten to a pulp, people's heads crushed, people broken up and smashed to pieces. That's when I knew he wasn't done." Winter was rarely surprised, but she was by this revelation. "Are you saying that this Billy Gumballs is the Gladdy Smasher?" The boy nodded, slow and dreamy. "I've tried to tell the police, but they don't believe me. They thought I was involved for a while after I showed them the comic, but now they just think I'm unwell. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am crazy. Crazy or not, I created him. I think the only way to get rid of him is to forget him. That's why I took the bus down here. That's why I came to beg you to help me. That's why I need you to make me forget." Winter put down her own cup and leaned forward. This was going to be a little different, but also more of the same. She rested her hands on top of his head, her fingers splayed over his scalp. "Sid, do me a favor. Think of the day you created that comic. Think of how you felt. Think of how you drew. Think of everything you did to make that creature, and hold it in your mind. Hold on to it, but not too tight. Push it up like a balloon towards the sky, and I'll catch it." He did just that, and as she drew out the memory, he shuddered all over as he brought the last of the bulbous memories up. "Like a goose walked over my grave," he whispered, and then he was still. An hour later, Winter was waving to him as he climbed onto the bus and headed the 50 miles or so up the road to Gladdy. She would watch the news with interest for the next few weeks, but it seemed that the Gladdy Smasher was done with his reign of terror. Sid had been right. It had been created from his own mind, and now that he had forgotten it, it existed no longer. Winter marveled as she walked back to the clinic that humans truly were fascinating creatures. Trick or treat! The screams of happy children enveloped the two as they walked up the sidewalk of Cashmere's Main Street. Dr. Winter, her costume making her look a little like a noblewoman from an episode of Game of Thrones, walked arm in arm with Marguerite as the two took in the sights of Cashmere. The main street was lined with pumpkins and streamers, skeletons and ghouls, and the smells of kettle corn and candy apples were everywhere. Swarms of children ran to and fro as they went between the storefronts, and Winter smiled as the owners filled their bags with treats. The owners of the hardware store, dressed as Fred and Barney, were handing out full-size candy bars, and Gladys Johns of the Animal Rescue had a very intricate dog costume she was capering about in as she handed out Scooby snacks she had baked herself. Everyone they passed had a wave or a kind word for the pair, and as Maggie turned her head in surprise to see a pumpkin burst open to reveal a grinning skeleton, Winter felt this was one of her favorite Halloweens in Cashmere. "This is fantastique," Maggie gushed. "And they do this every year?" "They do," Winter said. "Do they not have Halloween where you're from?" Maggie shook her head. "In the cities, perhaps, but we did not go there. Mother said it would be too dangerous. We often stayed in the forest, where we were safe, where others could be safe from us." Winter frowned. "That must have been hard." "It was, but I do not regret leaving that life behind. The cities are not so dangerous, and I have you by my side to explain these strange customs to me, oui?" Winter smiled. "Of course, I'll gladly be your tour guide for Cashmere's Halloween Spectacular." They came to the general store, and Winter turned when she heard her name. Angela came up waving, losing straw from her scarecrow costume, and smiled hugely at the pair. "It's good to see you two. Taking some time off work, Pam?" Winter smiled as she cast her hand out to indicate everything. "Halloween comes but once a year." "Would that it happened more often," Angela said. "Otto's around here somewhere, too. He and Marcus and I dressed as scarecrows this year. We got some really cute pictures before we left. I'll email them to you." Pamela nodded, but it was hard to ignore how Angela's eyes kept darting around as she spoke. She knew who she was looking for, and it worried her to see her friend like this. Angela would be back in the clinic within a week, and Winter really needed to find a solution for her problem. Perhaps if Marcus could give her another baby, but more children likely weren't the answer here. "You okay, Pam?" Angela asked, suddenly snapping back. "You look like something's on your mind." Pamela shook her head, waving her friend off as she fixed her face. "It's nothing, Angie. I think I see Marcus over there looking for you." Angela turned, seeing a pair of scarecrows and waving at him. "I'd better go. Otto is ravenous for his treats this year. Happy Halloween, Pam. You too, Maggie," she said, rushing off towards the shops further down. "Humans are so very strange," Maggie half whispered. "You can say that again," Winter responded, bumping her with her hip as the two continued down the block. Winter saw a small crowd around the clinic as they got closer, and when she came to her own storefront, she had to stifle a laugh at the sight of Juliet. "Juliet, what are you wearing?" Marguerite asked, not bothering to hide her laughter. Juliet looked like a nurse who had been caught in a thresher, and Winter was certain that she couldn't be comfortable with all that skin showing. Reverend Dowdy, who was seated at the end of the street with the ladies' auxiliary, would likely have had something to say about it, but he would have been in the minority this year. As Juliet did a little turn for her, Winter was suddenly very certain that the men who had come to inspect the candy bucket more than once had come looking for Reese's. "I'm a zombie nurse, of course," Juliet said, grinning. "It's been a big hit, Doc. I've passed out more than a few business cards to interested clients." "Fantastic," Winter said, though she shuddered to think what sorts of clients they would have to run out of the lobby for the next few weeks. "You two heading to the park?" Juliet asked. "They say that Charlie's playing a free concert there before the fireworks." "Ooh," Maggie crooned. "I would like to see that. He is very talented and so very handsome." Now, Mags, Winter said with a little wink. Don't make me jealous. What? The dark-haired woman said, feigning a pout. Who doesn't like a little window shopping? Juliet shook her head. Well, if you're gonna make it, you better hurry. Pretty sure he starts in less than an hour. Winter bid her a good night, and the two started making their way towards Calico Park. Along the way, however, they became distracted by something else. Something that should not have been there. Come one, come all, the man in the top hat proclaimed. Enjoy an authentic Halloween fright. Marguerite turned as she heard the barker, and Winter stopped to look at the shabby haunted house that was standing in front of them. The whole thing looked very cheap. The alley between the cell phone store and the flower shop had been taken up by a large papier-mâché pumpkin, its mouth grinning openly as it invited people inside. Paper bats and ghosts hung on strings outside, and the guests walked into the belching cloud of the fog machine as they went inside. It was all capped off by a sign that promised a refund if the buyer wasn't completely satisfied, and Winter noticed that more than one person came out with a familiar look. It was terror and deep fear, but also acceptance, perhaps even closure. Winter, however, was more curious about the man running the show. She knew everyone in town. Everyone. But this man was a stranger. He was dressed somewhere between a ringmaster and an undertaker, and as they locked eyes, she sensed something not quite right about him. He wasn't just a stranger to the town. He was a stranger to this world. Maggie was already walking in that direction, and Winter allowed herself to be led. Good evening, ladies. Would you care to take a trip through my house of horrors? Maggie looked at the entrance with barely contained derision. Is it very scary? I cannot speak to the quality of the scares, my dear, but it is a life-changing and one-of-a-kind experience. How much? Winter asked, not impressed. Just $5 each, and, of course, you will be given a full refund, if not completely satisfied. Winter reached into her purse and dropped a 10 in, the two of them heading for the entrance. What's wrong, love? Maggie asked. You seem tense. I don't know, Winter said, the hair on the back of her neck lifting now that the man was behind them. Did he seem odd to you? Most humans seem a little odd to me. I am not a good judge of this. They walked between the lips of the giant pumpkin, and as the smoke enveloped them, Winter coughed as it settled around her. It smelled familiar, brimstone and hellfire, and as Maggie disappeared from her arm, Winter grabbed for her desperately. She turned, but her love was already gone, and Winter spun in the dark place as she searched for her. Marguerite? Maggie? She turned frantically, her eyes not finding her, but she did see something in the gloom, something that confused her. It was her desk, the one from the clinic that she had sat behind so many times before, and on it was a steaming mug of what she assumed was tea. It sat placidly, the steam rising and dancing as she approached, and as her hand wrapped around the mug, she saw the tea inside beginning to churn and ripple. The cup shook, shaking Winter's whole arm, and as she dropped it, it burst as 100,000 memories spiraled from the spreading liquid. The bulbous little balls that she collected from her clients, each of them a rainbow of colors, began to fill the space, and as Winter stepped away, she heard a tittering little voice, like bugs on her skin. So many memories, Doctor. Is it because you're afraid to analyze your own? What lies within Dr. Pamela Winters that makes her so afraid to look there? What makes you seek out others so you don't have to? She reached behind her, her hand darting like a serpent, and as she caught the barker by the throat, his hateful words were cut off. "I don't know who you serve, you little imp, but you would do well not to torment me. Do you want to see what lies inside my head? Very well then, have a look." Winter took a deep breath, retching only a little, as she brought up a pulsating red something that bristled with barely contained energy. The barker struggled, his face turning different colors as she held him up, and as he took one big breath of air, she pushed the squirming fruit into his mouth until he took a bite. His eyes grew wide, his form trembling as her memories ran down his chin. She knew what he was seeing, but clearly it was not what he expected. He had expected her to be a talented charlatan, perhaps even a true practitioner of the arts, but as he gazed upon the smoking pits she had once inhabited, he knew she was beyond whatever small magic he possessed. She didn't know what he was, a spirit or some kind of magical creature, but she knew that he was nothing next to her, and she would not suffer this disrespect, not in her town. She would not be made a fool of on her own territory by one such as this. Snatching it back, Winter wolfed the memory down before it could overpower him, not wanting to ruin him, only to teach. I had no idea who I was dealing with. Please forgive me. His confident facade had faded, and now she saw that the haunted house was not the only thing shabby about him. "Pack your little horror show up and get out of my town. If I ever see you here again, you'll be lucky to end up in one of my little glass bottles." He took his leave in a puff of smoke, leaving Winter alone in the alley that she and McGhee had walked down only a moment before. She heard a whimper and turned to her left, her heart skipping a beat. Marguerite was crumpled on the concrete, sobbing like a child as Winter knelt beside her. "Maggie, Mags, it's okay. I was back in the woods again. I was being hunted by the man with the crosses. My mother, it's over now, Maggie. Just a parlor trick. He's gone now." She held her, letting her get it all out as the music began to tune up in the nearby park. "Come on, let's go hear what Charlie Guthrie's written for the occasion, and forget all about this." She looked up into Winter's eyes, her lips turning up as she took her hand. I would like that very much."